Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night, on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5-10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a new story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. DJ Jesus. Not exactly relevant but still creepy AF. My dad is a trucker and about 20 some years ago, a woman committed suicide by running out in front of him. He said that every night around the time she died, the cab of his truck would drop a few degrees in temperature and he felt a presence. He said this went on for a few weeks and finally he spoke out to her and said he forgave her and wished that she had peace. He said he never experienced the eeriness again. Not a truck driver, but I drive far for work sometimes. I once got a flat tire at 2 AM on a really remote back road up a mountain about an hour drive away from any houses or anything, without any reception or a jack to change the tire. Had to wait a half hour or so for a truck to go by, and I flagged them down with the light on my phone. Asked if he had a jack I could use to change my tire, and he said I got a jack, but you ain't getting it, and he drove away before I could even say anything. Some time later someone stopped and helped. I genuinely thought I would die that day. According to these other stories, they probably thought you were a ghost. I've got a few. Being stalked by, my gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country I believe. About 2 AM I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper. Went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark scared to death wondering what the frick's happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended I waited another 15 minutes or so before I opened my curtain and looked out the windows. Couldn't see anything outside and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since. I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. My uncle was a long-haul trucker for almost 30 years. He did a lot of runs through Texas and said that some of the small towns gave him a weird vibe. Like he absolutely didn't belong there as an outsider and should just make his delivery and leave ASAP. I've been driving almost 30 years. Weirton, WV is a town that gave me a weird vibe. Those people didn't like outsiders, and they didn't keep it a secret. Vibe was so hostile I couldn't even buy anything at a grocery store. Just went back to my truck at the steel mill. Making the long drive back to our university one midnight, my friend and I both saw a freakishly huge dog or wolf looking creature on the side of the road, eyes glowing and everything. It had been quiet in my truck before this, but we both saw it at the same time and yelled out. We don't live in an area with wolves, so I've often thought about it. Our bet has always been some alpha dog or coyote that has grown huge in the woods, or a bear that we both just mistook for a canine. Very much looked like a canine though. Not a driver, yet. Thinking about it as a career change. Used to manage in a large retail store. One morning we had an early morning meeting. A neighboring parking lot had an auto transport with the cab engulfed in flames. Drivers don't normally sleep there, but will park and go to their homes nearby. I park and decide to be noisy and watch from the distance. Firefighters weren't there yet, and after about 10 seconds with no sirens I call 911. No one had called yet. Operator asked if driver was inside and I said I don't think so, but if they are dead from smoke or fire. Right then the driver in only his tighty whities comes around the back clearly distraught. It was winter, so I rushed him inside so he could warm up and watch from the windows. I asked his sizes and had an overnight stalker grab him clothes and shoes. His stuff was clearly toast. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have, lol? One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an end-dump load of non-hazmat material to the general landfill which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed a turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around. Still not knowing exactly where my turn was. A very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the Sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. Another was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25. They had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing and someone may have just been fricking with me, but the dang thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building and 15 minutes later it had moved on. I work in northern Nevada nightly, running between Reno and Salt Lake City pulling triples. I only work nights so I'm used to working at night and don't really ever get sleepy, so I'm positive this wasn't a hallucination. Well, had to take my break so pulled onto an on-ramp around 3 AM near Halleck, NV and started surfing the internet. I distinctly remember it being a moonless night, which meant it was about as dark as night gets in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Out of the corner of my eye I catch something moving in my mirror at the very back of my third trailer, more than 100 feet away. There are tons of perpendicularly opposed lights on our trailers, so whatever is moving is only illuminated for a split second at a time. When I get the chance to focus on it, I realize someone is sprinting up my set towards the cab with something in each hand. Luckily I was idling on a steep incline, on-ramp, and clutched in and stuck it in fourth and gunned it. In hindsight, I'm glad I wasn't as heavy as I usually am, 110,000 lbs, and could really get up to speed quickly. I only take my breaks now in populated areas. Not a truck driver, but was on the final leg of a 16-hour drive from Florida to northern Ohio with a caravan of about 8 cars and half of us drivers, most of us up for 12 plus hours at this point and everyone else in the cars sound asleep. Swear we saw a man walking his dog on the side of I-75 in the middle of nowhere between Cincinnati and Dayton at 3 AM. To this day still don't know if that was real or we were hallucinating, but either way it was pretty creepy. As an Ohioan, that was probably real. Not me, but an ex-girlfriend's cousin's uncle. Yeah, I know it's a friend of a friend situation, but it was a well-known tale among the family. He was driving on a Mexican road at night. He felt a call of nature, so he parked on the sideway and jumped off the truck. He walked to relieve himself, and while doing that he felt a presence beside him. He pointed his flashlight at his side and saw, standing beside him, a small deformed person. It was naked and had both its head and face bloated, and he was standing just there. The driver, ex-GF's cousin's uncle, ran away to his truck, jumped in, and drove away from there. There's been a lot since I talked with my ex. We're cool but not too much in touch, but if you want to know more I could ask her about the fuzzy details. Not a truck driver, but one night my friends and I were driving through a lightless valley around 1 AM. Suddenly my headlights catch on an object in the middle of the road and, I crap you not, it's a man made out of tumbleweed. We don't even have tumbleweed where I live. It appeared very suddenly and I was so confused by its shape that I didn't brake or swerve. As we collided with it, my friend and I in the front seat both screamed, but nothing. No impact. We drove right through it, but it was just air. Both of my friends in the backseat were very confused why the two of us in the front screamed suddenly. So like, I know it wasn't just me. My friend saw it too. Only thing that's ever happened to me was during the last week at a major carrier before I began driving local. I was on edge because we had a strict no passenger policy due to insurance, and here's this female friend of mine who wants to become a truck driver. So I break the rules and take her out for 5 days to change her mind about driving. I left my home, headed towards my typical rest area right as I'm entering Illinois. I've driven this route many times so I know where I need to stop for the night. My truck was governed at 62 miles per hour. I am almost done with my 11 hours of drive time. Coming upon my rest stop in a few miles. Look at my Qualcomm and it says I have an extra hour and a half to drive. There is no way possible. I'm driving west to east. It was not daylight savings time. Late August. So I decide to get closer to my destination and I continue driving while we continue talking. An hour later I notice that I still have an hour left of drive time. I am tired as heck. My friend is in the passenger seat trying to do the math for me. Time we left, brakes, etc. I finally said screw it and pulled into the next truck stop and called it a night. But I had been driving for 13 hours and yet my timeline showed that I had only driven for 11 hours. By Thursday, 2 passenger vehicles had spun out right in front of me, wrecking into everything but my truck, and 1 semi-truck stalled out in front of me going up a mountain pass. Great times one crazy week. My friend decided to go into medical instead. Last week, I was in the middle of nowhere in northern Alabama, driving at night. Went over a small rise and see something on the side of the road between me and the next little hill. As I get closer, realize it's kind larger. So I edge myself slightly away from it in my lane in case it's a tree or something. Turns out to be a homeless dude on the side of the road wearing some kind of tan trench coat and a really gaunt look in his eyes. Like, he wanted me to hit him. It was creepy. Well, nothing paranormal but something out of a strange biology book. I was driving a person in my care from the clinic out of state back home. It started to rain and I was on a very rural road due to a detour and frogs were coming out onto the road in droves. The whole road was jumping and moving. The car started to slide around on the frog carcasses. I had to drive about 20 miles per hour just to stay reliably on the road. I must have killed thousands of frogs that day. I'm simultaneously sad and grossed out. Not a truck driver. Was driving down I-5 in the Pacific Northwest. Foggy day in the morning with my wife. Lots of traffic with the morning commute. I see what looks like a tan box in the middle of the road. As I get closer I consider switching lanes. Look over my shoulder to see if it is clear when my wife says it's a person. I swerve into the next lane and stop us on the shoulder. We could clearly see it was a body of a woman. Ever so crumpled. A semi-truck is coming behind us and doesn't see. He didn't have time to swerve like I did and he hit her body and kept on going. We called 911 and by now cars were piling up in front of us on the shoulder. Some of them hit her body as well. In the rear view I can see a car with a door open. Flashers on. It's perfectly in line with the lady's body. I wonder to this day what possessed her to get out of her car and step into traffic. I suppose I'll never get an answer. Not a creepy one per se, but anytime I haul through Navajo Nation of New Mexico it's freaking terrifying. One night it's pitch black and there's an old man as aged as death walking along the right side and he stops and turns to hitchhike, but as I get closer he's just staring at me and moving closer from the shoulder into the road. I have to swerve to the left not to kill him. I'm not necessarily a trucker, but I am a commercial delivery driver in a rural area in Midwest US. Randomly one day as I am leaving our home store, the radio just stopped working in the store. We thought nothing of it and I left to start the day and they just turned off the radio in the store and continued their day. I start the car and boom, radio not working. But it wasn't working on every single station. So I thought that was weird and decided to go back in the store and ask them to see if it was that way on their radio. Same thing. I go out to my personal car, no radio. I call my fiance and best friend who are on the complete opposite side of the county where it's not rural, no radio. Call my mom, nothing on her end. Everyone I worked with called surrounding stores and customers and they had nothing. It was this weird blackout. So I finally ended up leaving for the day's deliveries. I left the radio on in the background even though it was static just for some sort of noise. The volume was really low, but out of nowhere a faint talking can be heard and it was going in and out. It was a language I did not recognize at all, and I honestly don't even know what to compare it to. And it sounded like a female computerized voice. Oddly though, my store's radio caught it as well, as they later told me they heard it too. After that, It was static again for a few hours. Then slowly one by one, stations came back up. Now, this is so easy to probably have an explanation to, but the weirdest thing about it was that there was no media attention to it, and no radio station mentioned anything about the hours-long blackout. It was like it never happened. What freaks me out about this was the complete silence about it and how no one was given an explanation. My dad started driving truck in 1971. A story he told me once was how he was driving through the night to pick up a load of cement. He had a headlight burnout, so he kicked on the high beams to be able to see, and there in the middle of the road was a CHP car, doors all open and the lights off, sitting in the middle of the road. He came to a stop and got out to see if anyone was around but couldn't find anyone, so he got back into his truck and kept heading for the cement plant. When he got there, he called it into the CHP. Turns out a couple of chippies pulled a guy over, who then proceeded to shoot and kill the officers. My dad had rolled up on scene just after it went down. You can look it up on the CHP website. Dec. 22, 1978. My personal story isn't as scary, really. I work for DOT, and was operating a plow truck on a little mountain highway clearing mud and rock slides during heavy rains. I had been at it for about 10 hours when I had to just stand up and stretch a bit. I stop in the middle of the road with all my strobes and lights going and stand on the running board of the truck. A few seconds later I hear rocks and pebbles rolling down the mountainside. So I get back into the truck. As soon as I close the door, a boulder the same size as my dump truck lands on the road right in front of my plow. If I had been a few feet further forward, it would have killed me. Not a truck driver, but a first-hand experience in Dallas, Texas. I worked for a non-profit that was trying to help another non-profit on a project helping to get prostitutes into rehab and job training. We partnered with the FBI, local police, district attorney, public defenders, and a local hospital. It was an incredible program that chose to see prostitutes as victims instead of perpetrators. As I was getting my organization ready to get involved, I ended up spending time with the FBI agent who started the program. I asked him how the FBI got involved. He explained that after 9/11, the FBI was tasked with figuring out how Al-Qaeda would attack interior cities like Dallas. They determined that they may pull a Timothy McVeigh and load a semi-truck full of explosive materials, drive them into a city, and detonate. So, they decided to start monitoring the truck stops where the terrorists would stage the attack. They monitored for months and, of course, found that Al-Qaeda was nowhere to be seen in American truck stops. Rather, they found that the truck stops were filled with really screwed up activity, including drugs, prostitution, human trafficking, etc. He explained that while the vast majority of truck drivers are good people trying to make a living, that the nature of the trucking industry, with self-employed operators, created an environment open to many ex-convicts who couldn't get other employment because of the check-the-box hiring policies. So, ex-convicts often bought trucks, worked for themselves, and were hired by companies to drive their freight, which eliminated the many of the company's liabilities had the former convicts worked for the companies themselves. Long story short, he detailed the crimes, including the fact that the FBI was tracking many unsolved murders and serial murderers, human trafficking rings, etc. The more I learned about truck stops, the scarier they became. I ended up going on multiple law enforcement rides as part of the program. Let me say this, truck stop prostitutes are in terrible shape. Think about what must have gone on for them that they are hanging out at a truck stop turning $10 tricks. It's awful. I saw horrible things, including child trafficking and prostitution. The things I saw still make me sick to my stomach. To this day, when driving across the country, I will gladly skip the truck stops and go to a smaller gas station. I'm forever creeped out by what I have seen. My friend and I were driving south towards Gallup NM in his elderly mother's Prius, bringing it back to Southern California for her from Colorado. Middle of nowhere, on a dark road about 0230 in the morning when this 1990s safari van starts getting right on our tail. We move over to let the van pass and he gets right behind us and starts flashing his lights. My buddy gets into the other lane again and slows down enough that I can see that the license plate has a piece of cardboard taped over it. The van then starts swerving to try to force us off the road. My buddy floors it, but it's a Prius. We pull ahead for a second, but the van rapidly catches up and starts trying to force us off the road at speed. As we approached a ramp, I decided I had had enough of this crap and pulled my 1911. I rolled down the window and leaned out, presenting my weapon and prepared to send rounds into this van. The van slammed on the brakes and shot off the off-ramp. We continued into Gallup and phoned the police, who told us that they were probably trying to get us to stop to rob us. They did not expect any problems from a Prius with California plates. Scariest situation I have run into while driving for sure. A few years back I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 AM, and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, bit far rounder and thicker, catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air. 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kinda freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the frick I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. It could have been an UFO, man, but a logical human explanation would be someone flying late at night. Aircraft have a beacon light on top or on the bottom of them, and these lights are designed to be seen from miles away, so it could have been a helicopter. I'm not a truck driver, and this isn't involving a truck, but here's my story. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone, so I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said yes, thank you officer, and he said, "'Cause you're in luck. I just so happen to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and you could get all fixed up, no problem." The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said yes, please, and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived and the officer left. The driver asked, "Where am I towing you to?" So I was like, "I'm not sure. To town, I guess. Somewhere where I can get my tire fixed." He said, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you." I said okay, sounds good, and he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and bullshitted for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills. One for the repair and one for the tow. $1,200 in total. For one tire and a 5-mile tow. For a 1991 Grand Am that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options, so I gave him my credit card and he was like, "Sorry guy, we're a cash only kind of town." I was like, "Okay then. Well, I don't have any cash on me, so how we going to settle this up then?" And he was like, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns." So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 3 on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter, and in addition to the gas station attendant there stood the cop, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy, all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed, and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, That cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. TLDR. Kansas ghost town folk drained me of $1,200 and I'm pretty sure they were highway pirates. This reminds me of vacation, when Clark asks how much, and they ask, how much you got boy, and they also the sheriffs. My dad was a long-haul trucker years back. He would drive from Ontario all over the US. The one creepy encounter I remember him mentioning was as he was passing through Florida, of course. He was driving through the Everglades late into the night, out in the middle of nowhere. No civilization for miles either way, when he notices a white figure come into the headlights or on the shoulder of the road. He slows down and there is a man completely naked coming out of the swamp. My father slows and stops in the road, thinking this guy may need help. As this man starts crossing over the road, he stops dead in front of the truck and stares at my dad. At which point my dad realizes this naked man is holding a shotgun. He stands there for a few seconds staring, holding this gun, and then continues across and disappears back into the wilderness whence he came. So many questions. The answer to all your questions is M. Okay, so I was at one point a truck driver, but this didn't happen to me or to someone driving a truck, but it did happen at night on the road. So my friend was in a car with his 3 friends, driving out on Long Island somewhere. They had been out at a bar or something until it closed and were heading home. The driver notices they are being followed by another car. Everyone is like, nah, you're crazy. He pulls off at the next exit. The car follows. He proceeds right back onto the highway, parkway, expressway, whatever, and the other car still follows. Okay, now everyone is losing their crap. It's not a cop car, and it looks like there are 4 guys in that car, too. For whatever reason, my friends have one of those 30,000 candle power flashlights, so they decide to light these guys up. They aim out the back window and switch it on. In the car behind them are 4 dudes with Jason Voorhees hockey masks on. My friends scream. The now blinded hockey mask dudes scream and pull over. My friends got away. When you're trying to play a prank and get permanent eye damage. I don't remember the town, other than it was near Oklahoma-Kansas border, but we pulled into this town, and the place was deserted. Most of the buildings and homes looked like they were less than 20 years old, including schools. It's still one of the creepiest things I had ever seen. Later learned the town was host to a lead mine that structurally undermined the town. The truck was under the posted weight limit, and the water supply was contaminated, which is the reason it was deserted, but still creepy. Not truck driving and not tired hallucinations. I had 3 friends helping me around midnight one night get a big toolbox into a storage unit before I could PCS to Texas. After, I offered to take them to Waffle House for food as payment since it was about the only place open at the time. We left the unit around 2 AM and made our way to the Waffle House, driving through the Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia to get to it. The place is terrifying to drive through on a regular night, but my friend and I thought we would have some fun with the other 2 who didn't grow up in the area. They didn't know any of the ghost stories of the park, so we told them some while we were driving to kind of spook them a bit. Ghosts on the sides of the road, green eyes, the mysterious ghostly panther creature, the hill your car will roll up when off, rear view mirror ghosts, the works. We took a turn down a side road that leads to an old bridge that has the "I'll stop and turn your engine off and it won't turn back on" story. We get to the bridge, stop, and turn off the engine, sit for a minute, start it up, and kept driving with no problems. Nothing happened, just some harmless college kid fun. We drive over it and go around a corner, and standing in a ditch is a black mass just larger than a man. It doesn't move really, and even though the headlights panned across it directly, none of us can tell what it is. It's just black. All 4 of us screamed and I gassed out of there, nearly sliding in a ditch to get away. All of us saw it and none of us could explain what it was and still have no idea 2 years later. I grew up 5 minutes from there, and although I don't have any stories of creepy personal experiences with the park, there is a very eerie feeling that descends over the whole area after dark. Impossible to describe, but incredibly palpable. Not my story, but my father-in-law was a bus driver in Mexico for 25 years. One of his many stories was one time him and my mother-in-law, who would tag along for the ride sometimes, were coming back to Mexico City from somewhere in the north. The bus was pretty empty except for a few passengers, and a common thing to do there if your bus was empty was to pick up people that needed a lift in the smaller towns you pass through to make a couple bucks. They were going through a small town at night and see a large group of people waiting by a bus stop. My father-in-law decides to stop and pick up these people. They all get on and seat themselves quietly in nothing out of the ordinary. They get going and didn't pay attention to the people as my father-in-law was concentrating on driving, and my mother-in-law was in the front seat and fell asleep. Finally reached their destination. When my in-laws finally look back and expect to see the passengers they picked up, there was no one. Only the few actual passengers. My mother-in-law frantically asked one of the passengers what happened to all the people, and the passenger replied, "What people?" The driver stopped in the town at that stop and opened the doors, but no one came on. Not a truck driver, but I was a taxi driver in Georgia, and one time I got a call about a $80 round trip to the outskirts of town. The GPS said 30 minutes, but for some reason it ended up taking me an hour and a half. It was the last call of the day and I had just started a week ago, and I wanted to make an impression, so I took the call and picked up 3 ladies all dressed like H to someone's house, where we picked up 3 more apparently H, and the whole way they were quiet as heck. It made me nervous. Anyway, we were on our way to the location when I started running out of gasoline. I put in the GPS to a gas station 3 times. All of them were closed. The closer we got to the location, the less and less there were streetlights and gas stations and stores and more dirt roads and forest. Eventually I had to ask them where the frick we were going, and they said, "Just go, we'll pay you." And I thought, as far as we've been and as far as we're going, you better fricking pay me, goddammit. Someone's better pay me or heads are gonna roll. We went down a dirt road on a mountain for what seems like 20 minutes and found one lone trailer in the middle of a farm surrounded by forest where my signal didn't even catch. The ladies all went inside to fetch me the cash, and I hung out in my van for like 30 minutes as they all came in, came out, came in, argued about who's gonna pay me. Eventually one butch looking scary butt lady walked up and handed me $180. All she said was, "Now frick off," and I said, "Yes ma'am." I wasn't about to argue with whatever the frick was going on, so I left, and getting back was a hard time. I took so many wrong turns I ended up in Dahlonega, but I found a gas station just as my car decided to die. I had to push it into the racetrack and was able to find an old but dusty map and charge my phone to figure out where the frick I needed to go get out of this podunk town. I quit taxi the next week. Too many frickin' weirdos in this business. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.